afternoon or good morning if you're joining from west of where I am. You're very welcome to the webinar, and delighted to be joined by Naren Balakrishnan from Grant Thornton, who is a tax partner with the firm, and I'll let Naren introduce himself in a moment. My name's Dara Burke. I'm head of Swoop in North America. And during the webinar, we're going to be covering some of the highlights from the recent federal budget announcement as it relates to Canadian businesses. And we're in a little bit more detail going to be unpacking the changes that were announced to the SR&ED program. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce Naren, if you want to say hello as well.
Yeah, thanks, Dara. So as you mentioned, my name is Naren Balakrishnan. I'm a partner in our specialty tax research and development and government incentives practice here at Grant Thornton. I've been with the firm about 10.5 years, and really work extensively with a lot of SMEs, companies that are looking to scale and grow. And one of the big avenues to do that is through the government support systems. And one of the largest ones of those is the SR&ED tax credit. So I've been in that space for a very long time, and really thrilled to see in this most recent budget that we're going to cover here, some of the government's push to enhance not only that program, but some of the other areas of focus from an economic perspective that will help companies certainly going forward. So really looking forward to the conversation today, Dara.
Awesome. Yeah, I imagine it's holiday season came early from you or your colleagues, and no doubt lots of clients reaching out for clarity around all these changes. But I think it's fair to say generally well received and generally positive updates to the program. In some quarters it sounds like it's really been labeled as the investment budget, and some of the headwinds and uncertainty that everyone's been living in this year, in fairness, have been met with investment and money being put behind some of the kind of important things that have been put in front of the federal government. So yeah, keen to get your reaction, Naren, and that of some of your colleagues as well. I think, $1 trillion worth of investment over the next 5 years, trimming some of the public sector and government, stomaching a deficit for maybe the next 2 years with a view to growing thereafter. So it almost feels like a private company announcement or maybe a corporate announcement on some level. So yeah, keen to kind of get your initial thoughts or reaction on when you saw the announcement.
Yeah, similar sentiment across colleagues and clients sort of reaching out, just the general consensus in sort of in the sort of entrepreneurial space. I think like you hit on it, sort of government running it sort of like a business. Maybe not surprising coming from a Mark Carney led government, but cutting the fat, investing in growth. There is going to be that deficit like you alluded to, but I think what we're going to have to see is what does this look like in the next year, next 2. How are we gonna look back on this budget? Did it really deliver on those promises in terms of investment and growing the economy? There's a lot in here certainly to reach that goal, and we're going to sort of see how it plays out. But yeah, very similar sentiment. I think it's growth. I think it's I think it's a lot of it is also stemming from what we're going to get into in the conversation as well is the US and sort of the elephant in the room in terms of trade war, and I think a lot of what we're seeing is how can Canada homegrown, how can we help companies here locally with a lot of these initiatives. And I think it's really a response to that and a response to kind of what we're seeing generally in the world. So yeah, positive, bullish, and we'll see how it sort of plays out though.
Yeah, and I think you kind of touched on it there, but global investment and bringing global investment here to Canada is maybe not a new objective. Certainly in the last 4 or 5 years, since we've been in Canada as a business, seeing some of the big projects with, Volkswagen or some big, non-Canadian manufacturers come to Ontario has clearly been an objective. But one of the things that I think is made more, I guess, financially clear in this budget is how some of those investment decisions might be made more attractive. And I think the first one that we wanted to dive into was the super deduction. I think this maybe paints a picture of a government that wants more manufacturing here in Canada and is willing to incentivize it in what, to be fair, is a pretty lucrative, you know, tax deduction. So maybe for the folks on the webinar that are less familiar with this new productivity super deduction, it's been called, if you wouldn't mind just giving us a quick high level summary of what it is and how it's going to be used, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even in our client base, a lot of, manufacturing, I think there's a lot of positives, not only with the super, the super deduction, but really, yeah, if you're a business owner thinking about buying equipment, renovating a factory, making these sort of capital investments, kind of this is really a critical piece of this budget. Essentially what they're saying is, we want to invest in business, we want to make it cheaper for you to do it. I think some of the key points really, Dara, around, that immediate expensing for manufacturing buildings is really key. So if you're in manufacturing or processing, you can write off sort of 100% of the cost of a new building in that first year, not over the 30 years like usual. It's kind of that year one full deduction. So that's kind of a bit of a game changer in terms of the manufacturing sector.
It's huge.
Yeah. So again, companies that are in that space that are looking at, where can we get that sort of immediate bang for our buck? I think that's one. Some of the details. I mean, again, that 100% first year write off,
And
acquired
so
after November
practically,
4th. Yeah.
sorry to cut across you. I just
Yeah.
want to make
No.
sure I kind of understand how it gets applied, because it does
Yeah.
seem like a massive impact for somebody's taxable profit in
Yeah.
year one. So if you
Yeah.
were normally amortizing a piece of equipment over, as you say, 30 years, which is a much
Yeah.
longer period of time, if you
Yeah.
put that in against your tax return in year one,
Yeah.
that could be a really significant decrease in your taxable profit and therefore the cash flow of the business at the end of the year.
Yeah, no, so you think about it like a $5 million manufacturing facility, that's a $5 million tax deduction in year one instead of spreading it out over decades, right? So that tax savings on that could be well over $1 million, just depending on your tax rate and different other considerations. So yeah, it is significant. So it's kind of that period is just that window has shortened, right, in terms of how you can make those deductions. So some of the kind of criteria, again, after November 4th is kind of the date for those buildings to be acquired. The buildings have to be, again, used at least for 90% for manufacturing and processing. New
Got it.
construction and used building. There's some restrictions, as always with these government announcements. There's some caveats that we have to follow, and there's some phase outs as well. So getting into 2030 and beyond, there's some phase outs for the deduction goes down to 75%, then after 2033 it kind of comes down. So really, I think the name of the game is act now, right? If you want to take advantage of these things.
Okay, good to know. Good message,
Yeah.
good clarity.
Yeah.
Get your equipment purchased now.
Yeah.
Um, okay, cool. Well, that's super interesting. And as I said, it seems like a follow-on trend. Like we've seen tax credits on our platform for businesses in the food processing space in the last year. We saw a new Ontario manufacturing tax credit, I think 2 years ago or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So it does feel like a continuum in that, and
Yeah.
maybe exasperated by what's happened this year south of the border and
Yeah.
manufacturing jobs maybe getting hit a little bit, it looked like in the data this year. So
Yeah.
hopefully this measure sees a lot more capex and as a result more growth in the coming years. But time will tell.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah, no, I agree. Totally agree.
so I guess the next one that we wanted to unpack was the SR&ED program. So the
Mhm.
SR&ED program, the first time I think there's been material updates made to the program in quite a while. Huge program in terms of its scope and impact across Canada and has been for a very long time. I think, as a company that helps businesses across the globe, not just in Canada, many organizations would look to Canada with envy in terms of how this jurisdiction rewards R&D. And this grant program is really the centerpiece of that. So I suppose before we get into the nitty gritty of what this budget has done to the SR&ED program, maybe you could reground us, Naren, in terms of what SR&D is all about for people that might actually be less familiar on the line.
Yeah, absolutely, Dara. So SR&ED, you might hear SR&ED, you might hear R&D, R&D Canada tax credit. Essentially, it stands for Scientific Research and Experimental Development. It's by far the government Canada's largest tax incentive tax credit program to incentivize Canadian companies to perform R&D. The idea, and Daria alluded to it before, Canada's program stacks up very, very favorably to other R&D regimes globally, and we do get data on some of these, and we with our member firms across the world, we have some, we have a sense of where does the Canadian program sort of stack up when we compare it to other regimes, and Canada's is quite before 2 weeks ago, before this announcement, it was already quite important and quite favorable. And what we've seen in this budget is really this program gets supercharged. I kind of love that kind of terminology. It really, SR&ED gets supercharged. What happened, for context, is over the last kind of year and a half or so, they were doing some consultations around the program. How can we make it better? How can we better support entrepreneurs? How can we better support Canadian companies from an R&D perspective? And I think really this budget and address a lot of those questions and concerns. And we'll unpack some of those changes. But really, if you're doing something innovative in Canada, regardless of the industry, right? So you think about manufacturing, we've kind of touched on that a little bit. You think about software, you think about artificial intelligence, AI, you think about even food and beverage, pharmaceutical. If you're a company that's doing something innovative in Canada, SR&ED is absolutely a program that you should be thinking about to really help fuel your growth, and sort of subsidize a lot of those costs, right? R&D is expensive. When you think about the types of costs that the program can cover, so those salaries and wages, those contractors, those materials. And one of the changes that we're going to get into, that CapEx piece, it can be very, very, costly to do this sort of thing in Canada. A program like this, for example, SR&ED, when we look at salaries, 60 cents on the dollar coming back for eligible activity is very, very substantial. It's not something that companies should overlook. So the way I look at SR&ED is fundamentally it's part of your funding strategy, right? So you look at friends and family, you look at external funding, government funding, and we'll touch on some grants as well later on here in the conversation. But SR&ED is an essential part of that. It's really a backbone for founders and for companies that are looking to scale in Canada. And so a program that was, in my opinion, already pretty strong, really got enhanced in this budget. So
Yeah, that's incredible. And
yeah.
before we go into the budget, I did want to just pick you up on one or two things. So 60 cents, so 60% of eligible spend could be returned to the business that files the SR&ED claim. That's exceptionally high by international standards, as you mentioned. I think one of the other things that I've noticed as maybe a misconception or a learning point is, even for non-Canadian companies, while you might not get 60 cents on the dollar, there can actually be still value in exploring this program if you're carrying out activities in Canada that generate knowledge or trial and error and so on. And I've seen examples of companies that we've helped. So just one point that I would layer in here for people to kind of take away is that while it greatly rewards Canadian-owned companies, there's also incentives here for non-Canadian companies in case you do find some of those in your client base.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So,
Just to jump on that, Daria, yeah. So I would say, yeah, the refundable piece is really key for a lot of the companies that are getting cash back is amazing, right? When you think
and it
about
is
like
cash
those
back,
expenses,
because I think
it is
sometimes
cash
when
back.
people think about tax credits
Yeah,
and so on, if you compare it to the US, for example, it's sometimes maybe cash that you don't see because it's applied against a payroll,
applied against
taxable,
different taxes.
something like that. But this is
Yeah,
actually cash this is a check in the post, check in the mail,
yeah,
coming from the CRA, which I think is
yeah.
something that for a lot of small businesses is vital.
Yeah, you often don't. There's a lot of misconceptions, like you said. Like there's that's one of the big ones is like, you have to be a profitable company that's that has a tax bill each year, that you need to you think about tax credits to offset tax owing, right? But that's absolutely the case, and so that's as good as cash. But there is that refundable piece for those Canadian companies. So the companies that are, again, in R&D mode, you're a lot of runway, right? You have you're spending a lot. You're not really commercializing yet. You're not turning a profit yet. That tax credit can be really key just to inject money back into the company. And to your other point, yeah, absolutely. Companies that are coming in because of this favorable tax credit system, companies are coming in to set up R&D centers in Canada for this very reason. You take advantage of these tax credits. You have those, those taxable. You have that tax that you owe. These tax credits can be very, very lucrative, even for non-Canadian companies. So that is a great point, Dara, about some of the misconceptions sometimes around
Yeah.
shred.
And one other one, sorry, I know we're going to get into the meat and potatoes now, but
Yeah.
one other one that I have seen in businesses that use Swoop is, oh, I file shred and therefore I'm not eligible for any other R&D grants. And I think that's another pitfall that maybe people fall into that costs them cash on the table. I think a good program to bring that to light is IRAP. So there's other excellent funding programs that are available nationally in Canada that reward R&D and innovation that also sit alongside Shred. So while Shred is maybe the flagship big one that everybody knows about or a lot of people know about, there are other grant programs that you could stack or apply for in conjunction with Shred.
Yeah. No, definitely. If the government, the concept of double dipping is one thing that we look at. So as long as you're not double dipping on the same sort of program, and so if you were getting a grant that's covering some portion of your costs, you can the portion that's coming out of the company out of pocket can put that through the shred program. So it's all about government program maximization. It's all about tax credits, stacking them up against government grants. IRAP is a fantastic example of a program that a lot of companies that are doing something innovative should take advantage of. But yeah, it's a misconception. So if you're getting IRAP, don't suddenly think that you can't claim shred, right? So
Yeah,
there's that cost overrun. There's those costs that can be applied through shred as well. It's all about stacking and maximization under government programs. So
absolutely.
yeah.
Okay, so I guess onto the budget as it
Mhm.
relates to Shred. So would love if you could maybe summarize or run us through the key things that we should know about in terms of what's changed.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just for some context, in the fall economic statement last year, after the consultations, the government did the Liberal government at the time did propose some significant enhancements to the program. Talking about enhancements to the tax credit rate. So, the 35% refundable tax credit rate at the time, it was actually proposed to go from the current 3 million to 4.5 million in that economic statement. What actually happened when so we obviously had some changes in government, and that this all came about again in this past August, when they reintroduced these measures. And what we were really pleased to see was that $3 million limit on the tax credit didn't go to 4 million. It actually 4.5 million. It actually went to 6 million. So effectively, companies that
Incredible.
are doing R&D, it's double. So really think about it as it's doubling that in terms of what you can get that credit rate on. So it was used to be 3 million, that goes to 6 million. If you think about that, that's substantial, right? So we're talking about, I think the numbers here are up to $2.1 million in refundable tax credits as what you can potentially avail from the shred program. That's substantial. That's monumental when you think about the amount of runway that allows for a company to do R&D in Canada. So huge jump. That's by far the biggest probably measure and change. And again, we were very pleased to see the government incentivizing companies to do that in Canada and going above and beyond what they actually initially thought they were going to do last year. So that's a big one. The other one is Canadian public corporations. So Canadian public, you think of a public corporation as getting tax credits, is one thing, but getting refundable tax credits now is even more interesting. So that was not something that was the case. So we think about it, a company in that position that's doing R&D, they they're because they're a public company, they weren't again able to avail these sort of refundable credits before. That has changed, and so that again does allow more more players to come in and do this, more incentive for these types of companies that are structured in this manner to do this and take advantage of these credits. Again, it's just facilitating more and encouraging more of that sort of investment in R&D from companies that typically wouldn't may not have thought about it that way, right? And just again, availing those refundable credits is really key. There is some nuance around the rules, and I won't get into in this conversation, in terms of how you have to, be qualifying. You have to be a Canadian public co, and there's some other rules around that. But essentially, it's that's a kind of a new measure that they announced in this budget. The other big one, the third category that I would say, and we've touched on capital expenditure a little bit here in the conversation, but CapEx costs being reintroduced into SR&ED. So for some background, many years ago, capital costs, lease costs were in the SR&ED program. They were taken out, I think, as of 20, I want to say 2012, 2013. So for many years, companies have not been able to get a tax credit on those capital expenditures. That is changing in this budget. So again, you think about manufacturing, you think about companies that are heavily involved in equipment, manufacturing, any sort of industry that's heavy on those CapEx costs. It's a game changer in terms of that decision making now, right? So maybe you want to invest in that piece of equipment because you know you're going to get a tax credit. You're going to get a portion of that cost back. It changes a lot of the way companies are starting to think. I've had a number of clients and companies reach out and say, hey, like we heard about this change. Is this a good time to make this investment in this capital expenditure? Absolutely. And again, I've said this a couple times in the conversation. There's caveats and there's rules around intent and the capex equipment really from an R&D perspective. So there is some guidelines that you have to follow. And again, we're going to be on top of that in terms of some of the policies and some of the things that we're going to need to look out for. But again, a huge change, kind of that reintroduction of the capex is really key. So you bought a $500,000 piece of equipment for R&D, you couldn't claim it for SR&ED before, and now you can. So very simply,
Amazing.
it's a huge change.
And we're thinking broader than just manufacturing. I think going back to the super deduction, it's clear that that was very targeted at manufacturing. This capex update is broadly applicable, construction, real estate, as long as there's an R&D element.
Very well said. Like, I mean, I think you think of, equipment in the manufacturing space, but for example, like we've got companies in even software hardware, right,
Mm,
that could be investing a lot in equipment. You've got even software companies that are investing in a lot of the, specific servers, and a lot of these costs can get expensive. And again, like
yeah,
as long as we can align it with an R&D project and there's a justification that, the equipment is being purchased for that reason, we should be able to get a portion of that cost back. So it's starting to make a lot of those decisions a little bit easier, whereas before this budget you weren't able to get that sort of cost back. So
interesting. And it's interesting to see it's already starting to bubble up in your client conversations, even since the
yes,
announcement. And on the first one related to those companies that are in the public markets, have you
yeah.
seen anything on your side or any discussion or any signals as to how that's changing or even what the intention is? Are these companies investing in R&D outside of Canada? Is that what they're trying to bring into scope? What do you think is happening there in terms of policy?
A little bit, yeah. I think, to be quite honest, before this change, I wouldn't say we had a lot of public companies that were really interested in claiming SR&ED, just because you weren't getting that refundable credit. And I think now it's going to start to bring more, again, more. I don't know what the expression is, but more people to the dance, right? Like you're just going to have
Right,
more
right.
entrance to the tax credit. So I think we're going to start to see more of that. We're just going to start to see more, because of that ability for companies to do it. I think we're just going to see more interest and more uptake. So I think it's going to be a bit of wait and see on how that one in particular is adopted. Just
Yeah.
kind of the nature of companies, but it is a positive change for sure. So
Yeah. I think
yeah.
as well, when you were talking about CapEx just now,
Mhm.
unrelated to manufacturing, the other area that comes to mind that I know is earmarked as a really high priority sector by the government is agriculture and food and agribusiness. And we've seen some grants already be stood up over the past year. Is it your sense that maybe that CapEx is also seeking to invest, or that CapEx adjustment is also seeking to kind of incentivize maybe the agribusiness side of Canada as well, knowing that that's a priority? And I'm not sure if you've seen anything in terms of clients or other grants to support that.
I would say it's one of the sectors in our portfolio, certainly, and just from people that I talk to, that's really booming. And I think agriculture, agri-tech is an emerging space. The food and beverage, like you mentioned, Dara. So yeah, I would say certainly. I think it's not only the SR&ED changes, but also some of the other government supports, other government grants for those sectors. That's going to make make it easier for companies to do more of that sort of work here in Canada, quite frankly. Like maybe they didn't, you didn't think it was possible here to do a lot of that. You may have to go to the US. And now I think with those investments, with these changes, I think that particular sector, when you think about like the prairies and you think about certain regions in Canada where there is a lot of that sort of work happening, I think it's going to make, and we're already starting to see it. I think we're going to see more of that investment here in those sectors for sure.
Nice.
Yeah.
Um, I should have mentioned at the top of the webinar, but just in terms of Q&A and comments, guys, if anyone does want a question answered or picked up by Naren or myself, please just pop it into the Q&A. We'll do our best to get to it during the conversation or as we finish. So just a housekeeping update. Um, okay, so the other area, Naren, that I wanted to maybe briefly unpack with you, and it's the elephant in the room, or maybe the orange elephant in the room, is the kind of trade war and the uncertainty that that's brought about this year. And then seeing how that's sort of been represented in the budget and the announcement the week before last. So I think going into the budget, there were certain areas of the economy that were clearly acutely impacted. I think the trade deal that was already in place in North America seems to have shielded, I believe it's like 85% of goods that are moving into the US, but still, aluminium, steel, lumber, and building materials seems to have, really been hit. Those materials exports into the US seem to be down 30%.
Mhm.
Unemployment's creeping up 7%, a little bit higher in some places like Windsor that might be more exposed to this particular area. Um, Interest rate cuts now sub 5% prime borrowing, which is generationally low, really. So I did want to look at, what the budget response was to all of this. It's clearly a big concern of theirs. It's clearly impacting some industries. Um, what sort of a response have we seen in the budget? And maybe another question that I'd ask you is, how long does it take before grants and funding is available for businesses to apply for? I mean, clearly there's an allocation of funding towards some of these strategies.
Mhm.
Do you see that there's a bit of a protracted timeline before businesses might see them in terms of tariff reliefs or any other kind of programs?
Yeah, we've seen some of that already in place even before the budget. Some of the tariff relief, I think, coming out of like I think it was the BDC had announced some funding. So I think it is going to be a quick turnaround here, hopefully. In terms of you asked about sort of what we're seeing in terms of sort of that relief. I think it's about 25 billion that was kind of put forth in this budget in terms of strategic measures. I think the centerpiece is this strategic response fund. It's a $5 billion fund over 6 years. And then it's really designed for firms in all sectors to help adapt, diversify, and grow. I think adapt is really the key word here, key phrasing when you think about, it's kind of a new world we're in, a kind of a new trade war. And so how do you going to adapt to these changes? And companies have to be nimble. I've seen it firsthand with clients, coming to me and saying like, yeah, what is there to support, right? What is there to support us? These industries you alluded to,
Yeah,
Dara, like steel, aluminum, automotive. We've got clients in that space, manufacturing. What is the government doing about that? And so we did hear, we did get some answers to a question in this budget. So again, that strategic response fund, we're going to get some more details around how that's going to be deployed and sort of the timing, hopefully sooner than later. There is additional support as well that I wanted to highlight. So there's the 1 billion over 3 years for these what we call these regional development agencies. So kind of more regionalized tariff response initiatives.
yep,
500 million over 3 years to renew and expand NRC forestry programs. 16.5 million was proposed for the can export program, which I think Dara, you wanted to kind of talk a little bit about, sort of enhancing that program, which is a program that's been very well received by entrepreneurs for
yeah,
diversification efforts coming out of Export Can, and then reskilling. So I think one of the again challenges is employment and the job losses that we've seen. You've probably seen it in the headlines. A lot of these plants, a lot of these automotive plants, with just what is the government going to do about that? So really looking at some reskilling and some employment insurance flexibility as well. So Yeah, so there's a lot in here for sure. And we kind of expected that to be the case, but it's good that the government sort of put money where their mouth is and sort of addressed this challenge. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know, Dar, did you want to talk a little bit about what you're
Yeah.
seeing in terms of the trade diversification and that
In
piece?
terms in terms of stuff that we see, I think uh, a few elements of anecdotal evidence in terms of the businesses that are using our platform in Canada. Some of the trade relief measures I think people are finding hard to apply for. I know the Ontario specific one people are finding difficult to actually get approved.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that you need to show an inability to pick another supplier. So if your supplier is in the US and as a result of that, your your cost of using that supplier dramatically has increased, um, you need to be able to show that you can't reasonably find another supplier. There are some revenue protection ones. I think it's just making them more simple and available to small business owners. I think it's probably obvious to most people, but small business owners have very little time in their week to dedicate to thinking about grants and funding. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think simplicity and accessibility are really, really important when people are designing these programs. In terms of can export, because that was mentioned, can export,
Mm-hmm.
as you know, is not new.
Mm-hmm.
And our experience of can export is that it oversubscribes every single year
Mm-hmm.
in a fairly short window. So just
Yeah.
as you said,
Yeah.
even before 2025, even before all of this uncertainty with international trade, can export was a wildly popular grant in Canada. So
Yeah.
for those of you unfamiliar, there's up to 50K funding available for small businesses or medium-sized businesses to essentially explore new markets. And that might involve attending trade shows or flying to meet customers in France or the US. So all of that sort of marketing related overhead associated with developing new customer relationships and new markets. I think the average funding amount is around 35K that they disperse, which means, not everything you apply for you're going to get. One of the changes that has come forward even before the budget announcement was can export innovation. I think they've sort of enhanced the can export program to include more grants. And that brings in R&D activities involving other markets. So clearly there's an intention even before the budget perhaps to help Canadian businesses develop other markets and specifically non-US markets. Um, I think the figure that I'm seeing is that there's a sort of a broad objective to double non-US trade over the next 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's obviously going to require normal SMEs in Canada to find customers and trading partners in the EU, in Asian countries, in LATAM, perhaps in the UK. So all of these programs are super helpful, but equally, the trade missions that happen, the new plants that get developed and built in different countries and um, different even state bodies signing MOUs with companies in different countries to develop technologies and pharmaceuticals. All of these things contribute to that objective. But I think can export is clearly a successful grant because of how widely accessed it is. So that's probably a good place to start. And I'm not surprised to see that featured in the budget with more
Yeah.
funding, knowing how oversubscribed it is even before the budget.
Yeah. I would echo that on CanExport just to add 2 cents is like we're seeing the same thing. It's kind of that oversubscription. We saw a lot of very competitive program, a lot of companies applying in. A lot of times they're they have to sort of close their intakes and so hopefully, with maybe some more investment here in that particular program being so popular and so accessed by companies that we're going to see more just more adoption and just more being given out to companies to take advantage of that because I think it is a really good program. And I
Yeah,
kind of like the focus of what they're doing, and it kind of fits. Canexport really fits kind of the paradigm of like what we need in this point in time. Really is the way I look at it, right? So if you look at what we're seeing with the U.S., kind of going out even outside of the U.S., I think they actually had some restrictions around U.S. It was a little bit more, it was different versus the rest of the world in terms of that program and how they were treating applicants. So it's interesting that that's one of the
yeah.
programs. Yeah.
I think the other one to watch out for, and this is more me hoping
Mhm.
than knowing anything specific, but the EDC, so the Export Development, Agency of Canada,
Yeah.
they're calling out that they want to be facilitating 25 billion worth of business or an
Hmm.
increase in 25 billion between now and 2023 or 2020, 2030. How they achieve that, I'm not sure. Traditionally, that's been providing guarantees to trade, backstopping lending by the banks, etc.
Hmm.
So, you know, the cynic in me says they tend to move slowly, and I hope that I'm proven wrong. But I think they have phenomenal machinery and ability to actually impact SMEs in Canada in terms of their ability to actually fund expansion overseas. So hopefully more to come on that. Maybe, I mean, they've called it out in the budget without a lot of clarity. So I hope they back that up with some legitimate programs, or maybe even beef up some of the programs they have, like the TELP line of credit, for example.
Yep. No, totally. Um, I guess the other piece, Dara, would be Buy Canadian. So I think we're hearing a lot about procurement.
Yeah.
I think this hasn't gone as smoothly in the past in terms of selecting Canadian suppliers for whatever reason. I think there is a bit of a commitment from this government. Again, we'll see how this plays out to adopt more of a Buy Canadian policy. What's sort of your take on Buy Canadian, and how do you see that sort of playing out post budget?
Yeah. I mean, I more as a consumer, if I take my swoop hat off and just put my resident of Canada hat on, I notice in the market, whether it's credit card spend or products on the shelf retail wise, there's clearly a nationalistic movement for people to at least visibly see which products are Canadian and not Canadian, and where you're spending money in terms of impacting Canadian businesses and otherwise. So it certainly feels like there's a pretty strong wave of commitment on the consumer side to support Canadian businesses. Now, in terms of enabling businesses to access, for example, federal contracts and procurement opportunities with the government, which I think is what the federal government is pointing to, um, we'll see how easy that becomes. I think if I was to compare it with, for example, the SBA in the US, they've had some success with some of the ways that they've done it. And I
Right.
think Canada could potentially look to, for example, the Section 8 of SBA, I think it's called, which is allowing female-owned businesses to procure or get a preferential access to government contracts to stimulate that portion of the entrepreneur population. I think, hopefully setting up some kind of machinery like that in the government in Canada, whereby Canadian owned businesses could access, procurement opportunities from Canada would also be great. I think they've talked about making more MOUs, so memorandums of understandings available so that businesses can contract more easily with, for example, Life Sciences Ontario. I saw they signed an
Mhm.
MOU with an AI company that we know just this week. So there's
Yep.
hopefully more activity happening in terms of giving federal procurement opportunities to Canadian SMEs.
Yep.
But yeah, the
Yep.
proof will be in the pudding.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. Yep.
cool. So I think the final area that I did want to unpack or spend a few minutes with you, Naren, on close to our heart here at Swoop is open banking.
Yeah.
And open banking has been labeled a variety of different things in different jurisdictions. Consumer driven finance seems to be what's going to stick here in Canada. But, broadly speaking, a consumer or a business owner's ability to actually move their data from a bank and use it as they wish, like that's fundamentally what we're talking about. Portability of your own data is really at the heart of what open banking is all about.
Yep.
And for various reasons, Canada has been a little bit of a laggard, a little bit slow in terms of putting a framework together. I think there's been lots of consultation, lots of legislative discussion and work over the past 10 years, but there was some signals that I think are important to call out. So um, specifically, the ownership or the overview has moved to the Bank of Canada.
Yep.
Um, specifically, they're talking about making read access only of that data available from 2026. So that's a very, very near term objective. And then they're also in the same thing talking about stable coins and some pretty progressive things, which I think is fair to
Right.
call out. But for me, I think that was a big one, and wasn't necessarily expecting it. I'm not sure if you had any kind of insights or any kind of view in terms of seeing that coming, but I didn't necessarily see it coming. I thought it was excellent to see. And for Canadian financial services, which do, does attract criticism for its level of competition. I think it was a real signal from the government that they do want to promote competition, um, and open up access to the market to maybe more players and more fintechs.
Yeah, I'm with you, Dara. Like I think we've always seen Canada being slower to adopt open banking, and for whatever reason, I think they finally sort of listened in this budget to some extent. Again, we're going to see how this kind of plays out, but just having more of that access for fintech companies. They've proposed a bit of a timeline, 2026, 2027 for a lot of this sort of things to happen, and it's kind of what we hear from the consumer, right? It's those fees, it's the settlements, the,
Mm,
the processing times. A lot of that stuff just has not worked very well in Canada for whatever reason. And I think this budget is hoping to correct a lot of those things. Stable coins, yeah, I was sort of very surprised by stable coins, to be honest, in this budget. So sort of a welcome thing there that they mentioned. Some of the fraud prevention, I think, is a big thing. We need to do a better job of that generally. And I
yeah,
think we heard about Quest Trade actually was in the budget, getting their banking license after 6 years. So
yeah,
major
and
discount brokerage is now a bank, which is quite interesting.
that's great to see. I think
Yeah.
last year Wealth Simple broke down some
Yep.
barriers in terms of getting, more banking licenses. There's rumors that Revolut are having another crack at the Canadian market, who are an extremely successful fintech bank in the European Union. So those are all good signals for the Canadian consumer. And the
Mhm.
things you mentioned, like the fees and the accessing data, those are all small barriers that will stop a consumer or a business owner looking for new financial products from their
Yep.
incumbent bank. So I think the more um, you know, frankly, pain the banks are made feel in this context, the better for the consumer. Unfortunately, if left to the markets, it doesn't seem to happen organically. So I think this is a really good movement.
Yep.
Um, okay, I'm conscious that we do have a time to stick to now. So what I did want to do was maybe two things. One, to make sure that we pick up any questions that might have come through, but also just summarize, like,
Yep.
for those on the that have dialed in and joined us, like, what are the key points to take away for your business or maybe your client's business in terms of what we've discussed. So what I might do is have a quick look in the Q&A just in case we missed anything,
Sure.
or the comments. So we have a question about grants for small business infrastructure. Um, don't know if you want to start there. I guess the infrastructure might depend on whether we're talking about maybe buying equipment or purchasing a
Yeah.
building.
Yeah, the couple that come to mind are the regional development programs. So I know there's and I guess this again also comes to geography as well, but there's the Eastern Ontario Development Fund and the SWODF, which is the Southwestern Ontario Development Fund. Both are really yeah, they're small business infrastructure grants that I know many of our clients have availed. So those come to mind sort of immediately, but it's something I guess that we can kind of take a deeper look at in terms of what might be out there. I don't know, Dara, if any other ones come to mind for you, from clients that you work with, but those are a couple that sort of instantly came to mind for me. So,
Yeah, I
yeah.
think some of the industry specific, like food processing tax credits and manufacturing tax credits, come to mind.
Mhm.
I think now that SR&ED includes infrastructure and capex in it, that's one that to call out. I think with any grants, it sometimes does warrant a conversation to look at what the
Mhm.
business is investing in and then picking the correct program. So, um, to whoever asked the question and anybody else on the call, if you do maybe want a more detailed conversation about this, please feel free to reach out to Naren or myself after the webinar. We'll be happy to dive in. Cool. So let's recap, I guess. Um,
Sure.
so we covered super deduction, we covered SR&ED, we covered some tariff stuff, we covered some diversifying non-US markets, we covered open banking and fintech stuff. I guess let's just extract the key points for people to take away. So when it comes to the super deduction, I think that was a bit of a headline uh, productivity or capex incentive on the budget. What's the key message there, Naren?
I think the key word there is planning. So if you're planning any capital investments, equipment, buildings, vehicles, talk to your accountant, talk to your advisor right now, right? I think it's planning, getting ahead of it, being proactive. The timing is critical about this super deduction. So, the kind of the window is limited. So we'll get a little bit more guidance on kind of what that looks like. But as we talked about earlier, it's that, taking it from 30 years to 1 year. There is a grind as we go forward. So right now is the time to be proactive, make those decisions, have those conversations with your account, with your advisor, and how are you going to structure these purchases to maximize tax savings. At the end of the day, that's key for businesses. So I think it's kind of that proactive planning and getting ahead of things early is my advice on that piece. So
Sage advice.
yeah.
And when it comes to the shred program, so knowing that people might find themselves in different buckets here of being
Yeah.
shred claimers or not shred claimers, what's the key kind of takeaway?
Very similar. Like, I mean, you think about, investments in R&D. So both from a, just a manpower perspective, but also the CapEx piece. I think it sort of mirrors what we talked about with the productivity is, just planning out what you're going to be doing in terms of you have a piece of capital expenditure, regardless of industry, like we mentioned. Think about those investments now. If you're going to be able to get some of that money back, it makes the decision a little bit easier, but you do want to think about planning for it and being proactive. So again, talk to your advisor, talk to your consultant, and think about how you're going to invest in R&D in the coming years. The other piece actually that we didn't get too much into, Dara, that I'd be remiss if I didn't spend a minute here on, is the administration of the program is also going to be hopefully changing going into 2026. So one of the things that they've talked about potentially is looking at a bit more of a pre-approval process, especially on the technical side. So when we talk about how you should look at shred and look at your company post-budget, are there projects that you maybe didn't think about before that you wanted to invest in? Now, if you can get a shred credit for it because of that sort of thinking about it in advance, whereas we always thought about shred as a look back program. And is there a way to more proactively plan for shred is really key. So thinking about those initiatives, those investments, it's all about proactivity. So that's one of the things that they're looking at. They're looking to cut processing time with the program as well. One of the challenges that we have with the program that we've heard from claimants is sometimes it takes too long. Takes too long for the government to process applications. It takes too long for the government to complete their reviews. They're looking to streamline that. So when you go through this kind of pre-approval process, maybe it goes from 180 days to 90 days. That's significant, right, in terms of that cash flow. And then using AI. So we've talked about a little bit about that here and technology through this conversation, but the government is actually looking to use artificial intelligence as part of the way they're going to administer the shred program. So if you can think about that, that's going to hopefully help. We're going to see how that plays out, obviously, but that can hopefully help, the processing and making sure that it's fair and it's going to help speed things up as well. So a little bit of streamline, a little more efficient. And so how that comes back to companies and the way they should think about things is just, again, being proactive and planning, knowing that if you do things the right way, there could be a very lucrative shred credit for you at the end of the day. So that's kind of the shred component, Dara. I guess
Good call out. We
yeah.
we did actually have a
Yeah,
question, and I know you mentioned AI, so I think this is kind of
sure.
timely. Um, Question for Mike: any other programs available for startups in AI other than IRA? Um, my instinct initially, and I know that this probably warrants a deeper conversation, Mike, but
Yeah.
um, we had over the summer a deadline for the AI Compute Fund, which was a new grant
Mhm.
and was rewarding Canadian companies spending money on AI computing. Okay. And again, deadline passed. I believe it was again very oversubscribed and strong feeling that it's going to be resourced again for more funding. So there's also Scale AI. There's some of the regional funds that Naren mentioned, like the Southern Ontario Regional Fund has an AI stream, as I understand. There are the AI Compute Access Fund, which is the one that I pulled out, and um, and Scale AI is a pretty established one as well. So I think to give you a more qualified and detailed answer would probably warrant a discussion to do a little bit more of a mapping exercise. But those are the ones that came to mind for me. Naren, I'm not sure if you want to add any other ones as it relates to startups in the AI space.
Very similar, I would say, Dara. The AI Compute Fund, the Scale AI was one I was going to mention as well. NRC IRAP, AI Assist, and I think some of these regional programs. And so it's true. It's probably warrants a bit of a deeper dive. Again, coming out of this budget, we're sort of sifting through. We have a minister of AI now in Canada who's, I think, really so we tasked with this in this sector, and I think we're going to see more coming out of it. So again, if you have further questions, Dara and I are happy to kind of field it offline in terms of maybe some of the more specific programs, but those are the ones that come to mind for me as well. So
Okay, awesome. So then, yeah, I guess the two other areas we touched on was kind of tariffs and international trade. I think for me, some of the takeaways that I would relay to the group are the CAN export program to keep an eye on not only its deadlines as everybody typically does, but also the evolution of the program towards R&D. So, if you as a business owner or you as an advisor have clients that might be looking to expand their business, grow revenues in new territories that might involve getting on a plane, meeting customers, attending a trade show, all of these things are eligible expenditure under that grant program. I think it's a good one to keep on your radar this year. And I think tariff relief. So if the business that you are connected to as an advisor or as an owner is acutely affected because of your supply base, being affected by tariff costs, or your revenue and the demand side of your business being affected, those are two indicators to take a look at where regionally you might actually have some relief funding. Some of which was already there, but it seems to be the case that after this budget, those programs have been resourced and funded even more. Now, I'm not sure if you have any other kind of call outs on that one.
no, I would tend to agree. So I think it's a lot of kind of those investments that they're making. I think it's very much a business focused budget, more so than we've seen in many years. Been in sort of the space of helping entrepreneurs for many years, and I think this is one of the budgets that really is targeting those investments. Obviously, there's deficits, and they can be a little bit scary to think about. But the idea is they're going all in on these investments, and really, it's really to help companies. Right at the end of the day, help companies not only from the perspective of growth, but also to combat kind of what we're seeing with the trade war. And I think they kind of go hand in hand, and I think that's that's kind of the mentality here of this sort of this government and kind of what we're seeing in this budget. So tax incentives, tax credits, it's really if you do things the right way and position yourself, you could really come out of this really strong. The government is here to support companies that are going to make those types of decisions. So it's one of those talk to your advisor, talk to your accountant. We're here, we're kind of in it, and we're sort of seeing this day to day on a daily basis, and you're kind of dealing with these things. So we have expertise in kind of these measures. So really, see what you can do in terms of that being proactive and planning. And I think that's kind of the way I look at this budget in general. So yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Darren, I'm deeply appreciative of your time and sharing your insights on the budget and the SR&ED program and really what to think about. And I'm sure I speak for everyone else that's joined this afternoon in saying thank you. I think as we called out, our contact information is available to each of you if you have specific questions related to any of the programs we discussed. If you have other questions that maybe we didn't get to, please don't hesitate to reach out. And as Naren said, it's always a good time to speak to your advisor about some of these programs and seek more information.
Yeah, thanks, Dara, for the conversation. It's always a pleasure to chat about these topics. The budget, it's always a lot more interesting, I find, with when the budget has a lot of these nuggets that we can sort of unpack. In some years, it's not the case. It's a lot of cuts, and it's definitely more interesting. And to have this dialogue. So I always like to discuss kind of what's coming, and it's pretty exciting for companies. So
Yeah.
yeah, so. Great to again echo what Dara's saying. Just if you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to us, and we're here to support. So.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I will leave it there. And again, thank you for everyone for joining, and best of luck for the rest of the week.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers.